Joining me now is Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, who serves on the Armed Services Committee. A lot to ask you about the military and about Russia, but let's start first with the coronavirus and this decision to backtrack on the plan to have indoor dining. A good decision? Bad decision?
I think the governor made the right decision, and I do share his concerns that, unfortunately, we're seeing resurgences all across America. As people stop wearing masks, as they stop social distancing, we're seeing a massive spread. And so the governor is doing what he can to make sure that New York does not have its own resurgence. And I think it's important that people continue to know that when they wear a mask, when they socially distance, they may be saving lives. And it's really important that all of us share that duty to protect others.
Senator, part of the New York governor's approach is this 14-day quarantine for a rising number of states, I think now 16 states where there are spikes. How does that get enforced, where people drive in and out of New York State all the time?
I think it's difficult to enforce, but the governor's going to do his best, and I think making it the standard is important so people understand that if they do come to New York, they have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I think it's smart. I think it makes sense, and it's, again, just asking people to do their share, to do what they can to protect the vulnerable.
And as a member of the Armed Services Committee, obviously, I want to ask you about this Russia investigation now. The CIA is going back over the analysis. It's very clear that there was an initial disagreement and then more information came to the fore. And like all intelligence assessments, it's never 100%. There's a certain degree of confidence. But what about the president's defense that he wasn't told? What does that mean? And even now he knows, because he's been reading the newspapers and he's been told and briefed in the last, almost a week. And still no action, no reaction, no démarche of anyone in Russia. Yeah.
Well, it's more than that,
protection
Andrea.
of American troops. Yeah.
It's more than that. He actually today said it was a hoax. And this is, again,
right,
President Trump's unwillingness to stand up to Vladimir Putin. We saw it in Helsinki. We see it again now. He places his own judgment above those of his intelligence agencies. And it's harming American troops. I'm deeply concerned that we need a full investigation of both in the House and the Senate. In the Senate, we need it in the Intelligence Committee and in the Armed Services Committee. I am the ranking member on the Personnel Subcommittee. I want to know that members of our services who are serving abroad, serving in Afghanistan, are protected. I want to make sure that Russia isn't paying for a bounty for their lives. I want to make sure that the reporting we've seen that there's possibly 3 service members who lost their life because of this bounty, someone needs to be held accountable. So we need to know if President Trump was briefed, and if he wasn't briefed, why not? This is deeply disturbing, and I've read the intelligence reports, and I've read New York Times and Washington Post and AP's reporting. That reporting says that both intelligence professionals as well as special operations forces brought these facts up the chain.
Now, you referred to the president's tweet today. Doesn't that undermine anything that we might say diplomatically to Russia, notwithstanding the fact that the Secretary of State dismissed it out of hand today and said, well, Iran is a bigger problem? How can Russia take us seriously and take any pushback that the military might try to make against Russia?
Well, Andrea, you're quite right. The president has been unwilling to hold Putin and other autocrats accountable. He fails to stand up to threats, and he's failed to protect our troops. The one thing that's bipartisan in this country is that we all value and honor and protect our troops, and President Trump is not, and he's failing in his responsibility as commander-in-chief.
And my colleague Kristen Welker had a heartbreaking conversation last night with the father of one of the 3 soldiers who were killed possibly in a connected incident last year in Afghanistan, who has still not heard from anybody in the government. So he had to hear about this from the news.
Well, God bless him, and the sacrifice of his son should not be ignored. We should get facts and we should get answers. Our troops deserve oversight and accountability. They deserve to know. And with this intelligence reporting, I'm deeply concerned that Russia may still be being a bad actor in the region, as it has been in the past.
And the president also tweeting that he is threatening now to veto the entire defense authorization bill if the Elizabeth Warren Monuments Protection Act is in it.
Look, this country is in a reckoning right now, and I think the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the protests that have gone on across my state and across this country, are meaningful and powerful. And I think people are tired of having to look at statues, monuments, bases named after Confederate soldiers and generals. It's not fair. It's not right. And so I think for President Trump to threaten to veto the defense bill over this issue that is the right thing to do, again, shows his lack of leadership and shows his disconnect from the American people.
You also have an amendment to eliminate the discrimination against transgender people in the military.
Yes, right now we just witnessed a surprising but welcomed Supreme Court decision that said you cannot discriminate against the LGBTQ community in employment. Well, why would we have a different standard for our service members? Why would the only place in America where you can still be discriminated against be in the U.S. military? It's an outrage, and hopefully this amendment will be included in the NDAA and that we will pass it.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.